You may be seated. Okay, let the record reflect that the defendant is present along with counsel for the defendant, assistant state attorneys, both sides ready to proceed. Let's bring the jury in. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Did you heed my previous admonitions not to discuss this case among yourself, along with the numerous other laundry list of things you were not supposed to do? Okay, does the state recognize the presence of the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
And does the defense? State may call their next witness.
State would call Karen Korsberg Lowe.
I swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
My name is Karen Korsberg. Korsberg is Korsberg, Lowe, Lowe.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ms. Lowe.
Good morning.
Would you please tell us where you work?
I'm a trace evidence examiner at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
And how long have you been employed in that capacity by the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
I've worked for the FBI for over 15 years, 13 in my current position.
And can you tell us a little bit about your educational background in the job you presently have?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Scranton in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a Master of Science degree in criminal justice from the Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, and I've taken several postgraduate forensic science classes at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Those various courses or degrees that you've obtained and courses that you've had, did those involve the use of microscopic examination of items?
To some extent in school, yes, and I also had on-the-job training.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what training you've obtained through the FBI that qualified you in the position you presently have.
Prior to becoming an examiner, I spent just over a year in training. This was under the direction of other qualified examiners. I looked at thousands of hairs and fibers. I read pertinent journals, articles, and books. I took tests, I took oral boards and moot courts, and when I successfully completed all the components of my training, I was then qualified as an examiner.
And how long, how long ago was it that you became qualified as an examiner?
About 13 years.
And in those 13 years, have you ever been qualified to testify as an expert in the area of, first, the examination of trace evidence?
Yes, I have.
And approximately how many times have you been so qualified?
This is my 44th testimony.
And how many different jurisdictions, if you know, have you been qualified as an expert to give opinions in that area?
I don't know the number, but it's been all over the country in both federal, state, and local level.
And specifically in the area of the microscopic examination of hairs, how many times have you been qualified? Do you have that as a separate figure?
I don't really track it that way, but the majority of the testimonies that I've had have at least touched on hair examinations.
And again, in a number of different jurisdictions around the United States, is that correct?
That's correct.
This time, Your Honor, I would submit the witness as an expert in the area of the microscopic examination of trace evidence, specifically microscopic examination of hair.
You can have a brief verdict on her qualifications.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Now, this is the first time you've ever testified on hair banding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ms. Lowe, the topics that you are going to cover today in your testimony, the amount of training that you received was a 6-month course?
Objection doesn't go to her qualifications to be an expert in the area.
It's her training that I'm inquiring on, Judge.
Overrule at this point.
You may answer the question, ma'am.
The hair portion of the intensive training that I described was 6 months, yes.
And the courses that you have taken on this topic that you're about to testify today, there are a total of 3? Or was it just that one course?
The training that I'm talking about was the year on-the-job training.
And only a portion of that 6-month on-the-job training covered this topic.
That's correct.
And the rest of your knowledge that you've gained on this topic is by reading articles?
Reading articles and experience in casework.
And when you say experience in casework, you're referring to examination that you have actually examined?
That's correct.
And when you examine something, you render an opinion?
That's correct.
So what you're talking about as to your experience and on-the-job training is you giving an opinion.
Objection doesn't go to qualifications.
Sustain.
I have no further questions.
Okay.
I've submitted her as an expert. I don't know if the court ruled on whether I can proceed with.
Any objections?
Previous motions and objections.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Lowe would be accepted as an expert witness in the area of microscopic examination of trace evidence, particularly hair examination. You may continue.
Ms. Lowe, if you could just give us we'll talk a little about the history of the science of microscopic examination of hair. In general, how long has that been around as a recognized field of forensic science?
It's been, in literature, it's been done as early as the late 1700s. In this country, specifically the FBI, hair examinations have been done since the 1930s.
Just take the jury, if you will, generally through the process of the forensic examination of hairs as you do them.
Okay.
In general.
They're done in essentially 3 steps: collection, identification, and comparison. Collection is how the hairs are removed from the items of evidence that have been submitted in a case. Identification and comparison is done with a comparison microscope. So when the hairs are removed from an item of evidence, they're placed on a glass microscope slide for the examiner to examine with a comparison microscope. And a comparison microscope is 2 high magnification microscopes connected by what's called an optical bridge. The optical bridge allows me to look at 2 samples side by side in the same field of view, kind of like a split screen TV, so that I can directly compare the characteristics in one sample to the other. If I do a comparison and I find that the characteristics present in one sample are all present in the same arrangement and distribution in the other sample, I can conclude that they're consistent with coming from the same source.
Now, is it possible in your field to ever positively identify one hair as matching another, like DNA kind of thing?
No, hairs are not a means of positive identification. I can't say that one hair came from an individual to the exclusion of all others. But if they exhibit the same microscopic characteristics, I can say that they're consistent with coming from that same source.
And by corollary, if they show different characteristics, can you exclude?
I can exclude to different levels. If the individuals are within the same race and the characteristics are different, I can say that they're not consistent with coming from the same source. The exclusion is a little bit stronger if the differences are more significant. In other words, a racial origin difference, then that hair couldn't have come from this individual.
Now, are there things that microscopically you can determine about hairs, as in how they were removed from the scalp, things that have happened to them since they were, things like that? Are there things that the science accepts that you can determine by looking microscopically at a hair?
I can determine the racial characteristics that are present. The root appearance will tell me how the hair was removed from the body, if it naturally fell out or if it was pulled out, if there's evidence of disease, damage, or artificial treatment, and of course, most importantly, if it's consistent with coming from the same source as a known sample.
And are those examinations that are generally done, not in your laboratory, but in many laboratories around the country and the world that do these kinds of examinations?
Yes.
Now, are there in the literature certain signs that point to decomposition as being related to some artifact in a hair?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us kind of what is the history of the science on that issue?
The first papers that I'm aware of that were published were in 1988. One of the authors was Petracco. This was in the Journal of Forensic Science. And this was an evaluation of the morphology and evidentiary significance of human hair roots. In this paper, they looked at hairs in all of the growth phases and specifically talked about hairs that showed characteristics of apparent decomposition. And they defined a postmortem root band as an opaque band that appeared to be made of parallel elongated air spaces. And it seemed to be at the transition between the portion of the hair that would still be within the scalp and the keratin or the protein in this area of the hair would still be soft, and the portion of the hair that would be above the scalp and the keratin in this area would be hardened. So the postmortem root band seemed to be at that transition period between the hard and the soft keratin. There's a paper in 1998 that was an evaluation of human hair roots for DNA examination. The author was Lynch. This was also in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. In this paper, they were mostly looking at determining whether or not nuclear DNA could be conducted on hair roots of different appearances. But in part of this paper, the application of an enzyme seemed to mimic one of the characteristics that you can see in decomposition, where the hair comes to a point at the root end. In 2000, there's a paper by Tafaro, also in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, and this was a case study of two cases where the appearance of apparent decomposition in hairs helped them to recreate crime scenes. One of the cases, someone had been held at one location and then the body was found at another location, and hairs that had appearance of decomposition were found in the original location. So it helped them to figure out the timeline or what had happened. And finally, there's another paper by Lynch in 2001. And this was a two-part paper. The first one, they looked at samples from 22 cases where they took post-mortem hair samples. Each case, they looked between 10 and 15 hairs, and they looked to see when they started to see any characteristics of decomposition. They saw a postmortem root band as early as 2 days. In other cases, it was seen in 4 days, and the latest it was seen was 15 days. The postmortem root band actually was one of the less common characteristics of decomposition that they saw in the hairs in those cases. Another portion of this paper dealt with anagen hairs, or hairs that had been forcibly removed from living individuals. And these hairs were placed on tape in the woods. In a winter period, they were left for 42 days, and in a summer period, they were left for 14 days. And no changes in the appearance of the root was noted.
So let's go back through a few of these. The original paper from 1988 that you described, did that involve hairs that were taken from known decomposing bodies and then examined? Is that how that?
Yes.
Okay. The last paper you talked about, where you talked about part of the paper was an attempt to place hairs in environmental conditions, was that to see if hairs taken from live people could mimic those hair banding? Is that was the purpose?
That's correct.
Right. And did they find that it did not?
Right. None of the hairs in that particular study showed any changes.
In any of these, all these studies that you've discussed with us, are these all published in peer-reviewed, respected journals in forensic science?
Yes, they're all published in the Journal of Forensic Science.
And in any of those journals, did the researchers find, let me back up from that. Does the research reveal what causes the hair banding? In other words, what the biological or chemical process is that causes the hair banding?
No, we're not sure exactly what causes it, just what the microscopic appearance of the characteristics are.
But from the peer-reviewed journals that you've discussed, is there any indication that this particular artifact is created by something other than the contact between the hair and a decomposing body?
That appearance hasn't been replicated in the journal articles that I've mentioned.
Now, if I may approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit N-O and ask if this is a poster that was prepared by your laboratory for purposes of sort of educational purposes.
It was.
Would it be helpful for you to use this in describing to the jury the different root characteristics we're talking about?
It would.
I'm not going to move this to Your Honor. I would like to show it to the jury for demonstrative purposes.
Any objections?
No objections.
Okay.
Witness step.
Yes, you may.
I wanted to have the witness step down, Your Honor. Would you like us to try to use one of those lavalier mics so that she'll be
I think that would be very helpful.
Do we have one? I think we have one of those somewhere. Just get your mic up again. You might want to get just so I can stand with her. Be her.
Let me get the other one set up, right?
Okay, can everybody hear? Just speaking, you might make sure they can hear you.
Can everyone hear me?
Okay. Ms. Lowe, if you would just kind of take us through your poster and what it demonstrates about hair roots and what's significant about it.
The top portion of the poster shows hairs in 2 of the 3 growth stages. There are a total of 3 growth stages: anagen, catagen, and telogen. Anagen is the active growth stage, which is depicted here. There's pigment production all the way through, and you can see that the root portion of the hair is distorted. This hair was forcibly removed, so it was still actively growing. The cuticle layer, which is the outer portion of a hair, it's a layer of scales which overlap kind of like fish scales.
Would you like to use a pointer?
Sure. Within the follicle, there's also a cuticle layer as part of the internal root sheath, and that the scales of the 2 cuticles are in opposite directions, which lock the hair in place.
Let me stop you for a second. You just used a word I don't think any of us know. Internal root sheath. Is there any way you can demonstrate on that what you mean by that?
It's within your scalp. That's what keeps the hair in your scalp.
Okay.
So the outer portion of the hair, the cuticle, interacts with the cuticle layer of the internal root sheath to keep a hair in place. So if you've pulled out a hair and it hurts, that's why. So if a hair has been forcibly removed, the portion that's still in the scalp, I talked about earlier, the keratin still being soft, and this is why it gets distorted, because it hasn't hardened completely all the way through like in a naturally shed hair. The hair on this side, which shows the club root, this is a telogen hair. So this hair has completed the growth cycle and it's been naturally shed, either through grooming or another hair starting to grow. The pigment production has shut down. You can see the black specks in here. Those are air spaces. And it's formed this characteristic club shape where it kind of looks like a Q-tip. So if I see this in a hair, I know that this hair has been naturally shed. Club roots or telogen hairs don't show any characteristics of decomposition. They don't seem to be affected by the decomposition process. So the hairs that we do see...
Is that because presumably they're shed before death?
Not necessarily. They may still be...
Leading.
Overall,
Go ahead.
They may still be in the hair and haven't been shed yet. Again, nobody knows what exactly causes the appearance of the decomposition, but it's thought because the keratin is hardened in these hairs, it's not as vulnerable to the mechanism that creates the appearance.
Okay.
So the only hairs that we tend to see any characteristics of decomposition are hairs that are still in the anagen phase, where the keratin is still soft. And again, it's thought to be that transition phase where the portion above the band or any characteristics is hardened, and the portion that would still be underneath the scalp is soft. And the appearance of the band and the postmortem root banding seems to be at that transition phase.
If I may slow you down for a second. The transition phase between the part that's still growing and the part that's already hardened and set.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Another characteristic of apparent decomposition is this tapered, where the end of the hair may be a little bit darkened and it comes to a point. This is the appearance that the paper by Lynch that I referred to, with the application of an enzyme, it was something similar to this. Finally,
Let me stop you for a second. So this particular appearance, if I understood you correctly, according to the Lynch paper, was somewhat mimicked by the application of an enzyme to a hair taken from a live person.
correct.
Right. But that was not found to be the case for the postmortem root banding.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I
Right.
understood that.
Yeah, this appearance hasn't been replicated in any of the studies by anything, by anagen hairs, by hairs from living individuals. And finally, the last characteristic is a brush-like appearance. Sometimes this appearance is also accompanied by a reddish-brown coloration at the very end. And it's thought to be a later stage of decomposition, and perhaps one of these hairs where the hair is actually broken at this band. I don't know that that's exactly what it is, but that's what it appears to be. So any of these characteristics could be called characteristics of apparent decomposition.
And is that based upon the published peer-reviewed literature that you've discussed?
Objection, Judge. Proper bolstering.
Overruled.
Yes, characteristics like this are discussed in several of the papers that I mentioned.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to use to explain this?
No.
All right. Thank you very much. You may sit. Take your seat. Now, the determination of these artifacts we've talked about, is it a sort of a mathematically precise process?
It's a visual assessment of the characteristics that are present. There's, at least in our laboratory, there's no measurement that takes place, but if you see those characteristics present in the hair, you can conclude that it's consistent with some sort of decomposition.
Does the literature that you've described indicate that it's a mathematical process as opposed to just an evaluative process?
Some of the articles mention in the hairs that they examined where the band was found. One of them is approximately 0.5 millimeter from the end of the root bulb, but it's not a standard. Like, it doesn't have to be but so far to be called a postmortem root band or one of the other characteristics of decomposition.
Now, the photographs we've been looking at, obviously those are two-dimensional photographs. When you're actually doing an examination of a hair to determine any of these, different things you look at, are you looking at it in 2 dimension or are you looking at 3?
3, I'm able to increase the magnification and increase the the focus to be able to see more clearly the characteristics that are present.
So while the photographs generally demonstrate, aren't necessarily what you see when you look through a microscope.
That's correct.
What actual training do you do in training you to recognize postmortem root banding? I mean, you told us about the articles, but do you do any actually looking at them?
There are hairs in our reference collection that exhibit characteristics of either the postmortem root banding or the later stages of decomposition, and those would be covered in the training period. And additionally, the number of cases that each examiner works, some portion of them involve people who have been killed, and some of those known hair samples will also include characteristics of decomposition.
Would you be able to give us any kind of guesstimate as to how many times in 13 years of casework you've had occasion to see hairs with postmortem changes?
That's not really something I keep track of. In 13 years, I've worked over 2,000 cases. Obviously, not all of those involved homicides, and not all of the homicide cases resulted in known samples with decomposition, but there have been a fair number of cases where I've seen it in casework.
More than 100, less than 100, or you just really couldn't even guess?
I wouldn't even want to guess.
Okay. Now, in most of the cases you've had in the past where you looked at hairs and saw the decomposition, were those hairs where it was already known to be from a person that had deceased?
Yes, actually this is the only case that I've found a hair outside of a known sample or items associated to an individual who's deceased. Most of the time in casework, the hairs that I find that have characteristics of apparent decomposition are items from the individual who is deceased.
So while it may not be essential to your report, you do note them and recognize it?
That's correct.
Now, I said generally postmortem changes. How frequently have you seen postmortem banding that we're going to be discussing here in a moment?
It would be, you could see a combination of the characteristics that I showed on the poster within a single known sample, depending on when the known was taken.
All right. Again, have you frequently seen postmortem banding in your 13-year career?
In the cases where characteristics of decomposition were noted in a known sample, yes.
All right. Now, were you provided evidence to examine in the investigation of the death or disappearance of Kaylee Marie Anthony?
I was.
All right. Let me show you a number of items. Okay, let me show you, first of all, State's Exhibit in Evidence 87 and ask if you recognize that item.
I do. I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials.
And is that something that you examined in this case?
It is.
This time let me show you State's Exhibit 89 and ask you the same question.
Yes, I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials, and it's something that I examined.
And State's Exhibit 90?
Yes, again, recognize it by the laboratory markings and initials.
And State's Exhibit 91?
Actually, this item I may have just gotten a pillbox from. I didn't look at that specific item.
Okay.
Sorry. I may have gotten a pillbox, a separate set of evidence from that. I
This
didn't.
is the one that says containing dirt particles.
Correct.
Okay. So okay. How about State's Exhibit 93?
Yes, I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials.
State's Exhibit 94.
Again, I recognize it by the laboratory markings and initials.
95.
Yes, I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials.
And 96.
Yes, I recognize that as by the laboratory markings and initials.
You can just add
All
recognize.
right.
We'll assume
Okay.
you mean by that.
Okay.
97.
Yes, I recognize it.
98.
Yes, I recognize that as well.
99.
Yes, I recognize that.
100.
I recognize this.
101.
Yes, I recognize that.
I don't. 102. I'm not sure you were showing. That says vegetation, but
No.
okay. All right. Now, were you also submitted certain items that were indicated? Let me get this right. Certain items that were represented as being from known individuals.
Yes.
All right. Let me show you State's Exhibit for identification IS. Ask if that was one of the items, the known hairs that were submitted to you for purposes of your examination.
Yes, it was.
Right. And do you recognize it to be by the markings that you previously described?
Yes.
Okay. This time you're going to move into evidence State's Exhibit IS for identification, which has previously been identified as the full head hair.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Be received in evidence that states numbered
103.
I'll also show you State's Exhibit for identification IT. Have you seen that as well?
Yes, I recognize it by the laboratory markings and initials.
And is that one of the known samples that was submitted?
Yes.
This time you ought to move into evidence State's Exhibit IT.
what says the defense.
No objections.
Be received in evidence that states numbered
104.
We also show you State's Exhibit IW for identification.
Yes, I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials.
And was that another known sample represented as being from Cindy Anthony that was sent to you?
Yes.
Right. And State's Exhibit IZ for identification, which is a known, you recognize that as a known sample represented as being from George Anthony.
I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials.
Yep. Were you also submitted a hairbrush as a purported known sample of Kaylee Anthony?
Yes, I received both the hairbrush and the comb.
All right. And which one did you actually find hairs for purposes of examination?
The brush.
Let me show you State's Exhibit JD for identification and ask if you recognize that as the brush that was submitted as the purported known sample for Kaylee Anthony.
Yes, I recognize it by laboratory markings and initials.
This time you ought to move to State's Exhibit JD for identification.
what says the defense.
No objections.
We received an evidence that states numbered
105.
All right. Ms. Lowe, upon your examination of the items that we've described that were submitted to you, did you find human hairs?
In some of the items, yes.
Do you have how many total number of human hairs did you find in the exhibits? That is the unknown exhibits that were submitted to you.
I'd have to refer to my notes to know the.
Please go right ahead.
Number. There were at least 10, but some of the items may have had more than one hair, and I don't have a count for that.
Okay, at least 10 or more hairs.
Right.
All right. And in any of, pardon me, in any of the hairs that were examined from the exhibits that we just went through, the unknown exhibits, did you find any hairs that showed evidence of apparent decomposition?
Excuse me, it should have been at least 11. Sorry.
At least 11. That's okay.
One of the items had a hair that exhibited characteristics of decomposition.
All right. And which of your designated numbers was it? Your Q numbers?
Q12.
Okay. Clear. Is this the item that you're about to testify about?
It is.
And for the record, this is State's Exhibit 99 in evidence. What did you find upon examining the hair in State's Exhibit 99?
The hair in State's Exhibit 99, which is my Q12, was a Caucasian head hair that had characteristics of apparent decomposition. It had a darkened band, or what would be consistent with a postmortem root band.
And is that the artifact that was shown on the poster we looked at?
It is.
Did you examine that in the manner that you've described using stereo microscope?
I used both the stereo microscope to mount the hair on a glass microscope slide and a comparison microscope to conduct the analysis.
And again, did you look at it in 3-dimension through the microscope?
I did.
Now, can you further describe that hair force in terms of length, color, and other characteristics?
It was light to medium brown, no tissue was present, and it was 9 inches long.
9 inches long. Did any of the other hairs, that you examined have the postmortem root banding or other postmortem changes?
No.
Were any of the other hairs you found in any of those samples comparable microscopically to that 9-inch hair with the decomposition, such that you would conclude they could have come from the same person?
I actually didn't compare the hairs to each other. What I was looking for were any hairs that exhibited characteristics of apparent decomposition, and then that hair I compared to a hair recovered from the hairbrush, which is identified as belonging to Kaylee.
All right. Did you compare the hair with decomposition both to the purported sample from Kaylee Anthony from the hairbrush and also to the known samples from Casey Anthony?
I did.
And do you have an opinion as to whether that hair could have come from either one of those two individuals?
The hair in Q12 was microscopically dissimilar to the head hair sample identified as coming from Casey Anthony. The head hair in Q12 exhibited similarities to a hair found in a hairbrush, which was identified as belonging to Kaylee Anthony. The hairbrush contained only one hair, so this was not a suitable known sample, but the characteristics that were present in the hair from the hairbrush were similar to the characteristics present in the hair in Q12. So I can conclude that they are similar, but due to the limited nature of what I could use as a known sample, a more meaningful conclusion could not be reached.
Right. Did you also compare the 9-inch hair to the hair of Cindy Anthony?
Actually, I didn't receive those. I only received a hair sample from Casey Anthony.
But you said it was a 9-inch brown hair.
That's correct.
Based upon that examination, do you have an opinion as to whether the hair found in State's Exhibit 101? I just forgot. 99. Thank you. 99 shows apparent decomposition.
It has a darkened band at the root portion of the hair, similar to one of the photos in the poster, and this is consistent with apparent decomposition.
And based upon the peer-reviewed published literature, is that artifact found under any circumstance other than a connection between the hair and a decomposing body?
It has not been shown to be found in under other circumstances.
Now, did you take a portion of that hair and submit it for further analysis by another section in your laboratory?
I preserved the portion that showed the darkened bands on a glass microscope slide and removed the remainder of the hair to be sent to mitochondrial DNA for additional analysis.
Did you retain, the portion of the hair that had the actual root band that you described?
Yes, that portion was remounted on another glass microscope slide to be preserved.
And the remainder of the hair was sent to another portion of the laboratory?
That's correct.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit JU. I know you don't recognize outside the envelope necessarily, but would you open it and take a look at the packaging inside? Tell me if you recognize it.
Yes, I recognize laboratory markings and initials.
Is that the portion of the hair that you separated and sent for mitochondrial DNA? That's the packaging for that portion of the hair?
Yes, there are 2 tubes within a clear plastic pillbox, and these were sent to mitochondrial DNA.
Okay. This time you ought to move down to State's Exhibit JU.
What says the defense?
No objections.
We received an evidence that states numbered
106.
Let me ask you to explain a little bit of your terminology. You refer to apparent decomposition. Kind of explain to the jury why you use the word apparent and what that means.
Because we can't say that the only reason that we might see this characteristic is that it came from a dead body. We say apparent decomposition because it hasn't been shown to be replicated under other circumstances, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be. So we refer to it as apparent decomposition to be a little bit more conservative.
Thank you. No further questions.
cross-examination.
it please the court? Mr. Ashton. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ms. Lowe.
Good morning.
You discussed the history of microscopic hair analysis during your direct testimony. This is actually, I guess you can trace it back as far as the 1930s.
In the FBI laboratory, yes.
In the FBI laboratory.
That's correct.
And part of the history, of course, FBI laboratory has learned a lot along the way.
That's correct.
People's hair remains the same, correct?
Well,
People still have hair.
People still have hair, but hairs can change over time.
Okay. But what you learn about the science has changed drastically over the years.
Obviously, the instruments have gotten better, and the way we document things is different, but hair examinations come down to comparative biology, comparing characteristics in one thing to characteristics in another, and really that hasn't changed.
What has changed is the FBI's position on microscopic hair analysis as it relates to identifying individuals, has it not?
Hair exams have never been a means of positive identification.
There have been numerous trials where the FBI analysts have testified that this hair comes from this individual, has there not?
Relevance, specificity.
Sustain.
Judge, I think this is proper examination on this area. Now, you have cited numerous articles that you've read.
That's correct.
I think, was it 4?
Specifically regarding postmortem root banding, yes.
And you've also read the National Academy of Sciences report that came out in February of 2009, have you not?
I have.
And that report was a commission that was organized by Congress, was it not?
I believe so.
And the National Academy of Sciences is, of course, a very respected body of scientists, is it not?
I don't know the specifics of the members. Not all of them are scientists. I know that.
Correct. What that commission was it organized leading members of the forensic science community as well as...
Your Honor, improper cross-examination of 90.706.
May I finish the question, Judge?
Approach the bench. Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take our mid-morning recess at this time. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. I'm going to ask you not to discuss this case among yourselves, nor with anyone else. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Baez, is the thing you're talking about is strengthening forensic science in the United States a path forward?
Yes. Yes, Judge. This is...
Okay, let's wait. Where's Mr. Ashton? Well, the first thing you need to establish is whether or not she recognized this as an authoritative source before you start questioning her about it. But this may or may not be a learned treatise.
Judge, I would also ask the court, I would point out to the court that Justice Scalia in the Melendez decision cited the NAS report. And
for what basis did he cite it?
For his, if I can pull up, I will pull up the case and give you the exact portion of that quote.
Before we do that, I apologize, I was out of the room. Did counsel indicate what portion of the report he wants to question her about?
Yes, I would
No, he
Page-
hadn't indicated that yet.
Page 160 to 161, the summary assessment. That has to deal with.
Can I look over your shoulder?
Sure. I don't know. Check and see if that's got the whole. Page 160 to 161. No scientifically accepted statistics exist for the frequency which particular characteristics of hair are distributed in the population.
Mr. Baez, if you're going to read at a rapid rate, you will not have a record, sir. So there will be nothing for no one to review.
Certainly. On page 161, it states, in some recent cases, courts have explicitly stated that microscopic hair analysis is a technique generally accepted in the scientific community. But courts have also recognized that testimony linking microscopic hair analysis with particular defendants is highly unreliable. In cases where there seems to be a morphological match based on microscopic examination, it must be confirmed by using mitochondrial DNA analysis. Microscopic studies alone are of limited probative value. The committee found no scientific support for the use of hair comparisons for individualization in absence of nuclear DNA.
Okay,
Microscopy and mitoDNA analysis can be used in tandem, but may add to one another's value for classifying a common source. But no studies have been performed specifically to quantify the reliability of their joint use.
Well, you need to get her to recognize it, but unless you were somewhere different from where I was, she did not say that it was identical. And that's what they're talking about when folks tried to say that this hair came solely from this individual and this individual alone. She said that in her direct examination. But let's take it through the numbers. Let's see if she first recognizes that, but that's exactly what she testified to.
And could I request that this be proffered? Because specifically the first half of that paragraph discussing what court cases have said is clearly not scientific testimony, and that would clearly be improper. So I would ask that it be proffered so that we can determine, one, whether it's authoritative, and two, whether pursuant to 90.706 is on a relevant subject matter.
Well, we're not going to talk about what court cases said.
I think
A journal deals strictly with scientific principles. So let's take it through the numbers. Let's first find out whether or not, in fact, she recognizes that. But this is no different than what she testified to on direct examination.
I understand. I'd like to question her on those topics
And no one has said that you could not, but you don't pull something out and start reading it without. And from what you were saying, you didn't even have the document with you to even show it to her.
I was not going to read from the document,
Oh,
Judge. I was going to question her about her knowledge dealing with the report, its findings, and the science and lack of science in her methodology and the area and field in which she practices.
well, let's take it by the numbers. So let's get her back in here, and you need to see whether or not she first recognizes that to be an authoritative source.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's have the witness return to the stand. Okay, let's go ahead and proffer this. What I have in my hand is exhibit number 10, which is a defense exhibit, which was introduced at one of the Fry hearings. So I'm going to hand it to her, so when you start questioning her about it, she will have some reference. You may proceed with your proffer.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, you have a copy of the National Academy of Science report in front of you, do you not?
I do.
And you are familiar with this report?
I have seen parts of it, specifically the trace parts.
The parts that relate to your area of expertise or your field.
That's correct.
And the National Academy of Science is a recognized body of scientists, is it not?
It is.
And this report was commissioned by Congress, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yes.
And this was to identify the needs in the forensic scientific community?
That's correct.
And to also give guidance to the forensic science community on how to move forward?
That's correct.
Okay. And you would consider this an authoritative article, would you not?
Again, not all the members were scientists. Some were in other disciplines. But it's as far as offering guidance on what they thought could be improved. Yes.
So that's a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware of some of the criticisms that were issued in this report as it relates to microscopic hair analysis?
I am.
And what exactly are those?
Majority of them were, it really was the limitation of the discipline as opposed to a criticism of the discipline. It indicated that identification couldn't be done without DNA analysis, which I would agree with because hair exams are not unique to an individual. So accompanying DNA examinations need to be conducted, and that's what the FBI laboratory does.
And the reason this was done is because there has been, over a course of many years, numerous testimony, even including by your lab, identifying individuals by the use of microscopic hair analysis.
I'm not aware of testimonies where someone has identified someone as such.
I can have just a moment, Judge.
Does that article say that your lab did that?
I don't believe so, no.
Are you familiar with a forensic analyst by the name of Michael Malone?
I'm familiar with the name, yes.
Does he still work for the FBI?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And not in the laboratory. I'm not sure if he's still an agent. I don't believe so, though.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Gates case?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the name?
The Gates case.
From Washington, D.C.?
Correct.
Yes.
And this case was, a man was convicted based on Mr. Malone's testimony that the hairs found at a scene of a 1981 rape and murder were microscopically indistinguishable from Gates' hairs. Do you recall that?
I believe that was his testimony, yes.
And this conviction was later overturned by the Innocence Project when they conducted mitochondrial DNA. Isn't that correct?
I'm not specifically familiar, but I believe it was. But microscopically indistinguishable to me is the same thing as exhibits the same microscopic characteristics, so I don't know that that use of that word was improper.
You don't. So just so we're clear, it's not that you think his testimony was improper as much as well, let me rephrase that question. His testimony was correct according to you?
If the words that he used were that the question hairs were microscopically indistinguishable from the known hair sample, I don't believe that's improper. I haven't seen the transcript of his testimony to know if he went beyond that. And if someone did say that, this hair came from this person, period, that would be improper.
But it turned out to be wrong, nonetheless.
Objection to asking the witness to draw a conclusion.
Okay, let me stop both of you. I am not permitting any testimony about what happened in any other case. You can attack her methodology. You can attack what she did in this case. But we're not going to try or litigate some other case in this courtroom.
I understand, Judge.
Okay, so don't even go there.
Have we proffered sufficiently as it relates to the report?
She's indicated that she recognizes that portion to be authoritative.
I just have one question.
Yes.
Just so we're clear, are you indicating that it's authoritative as a scientific treatise, not necessarily as a policy treatise, but as a scientific treatise?
Correct.
Okay, very good. But the portion that you've been read, you agree with? I'm sorry, the portion that you described about the limits of the ability of hair examination, you agree with that?
I do.
And that's consistent with what you've already said?
That's correct.
I have no other questions for the proffer.
I just have one other portion that I'd like to
Go ahead.
ask. Are you familiar with an FBI study conducted by Hawk and Badole?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can you tell the court what that study consisted of?
Your Honor, could I have a copy of that study?
That's on page 161.
160.
Yes.
The study is on page 161 of what? Is that of this document?
Can I finish the proffer, Judge? I'm referring to something else.
Later, Mr. Ashton.
Oh,
Can you tell the court what that study consisted of?
The study looked at the correlation of the microscopic assessment of hairs and the mitochondrial DNA results with those same hairs.
Basically, it compared whether the accuracy rate of being able to do microscopic comparisons and whether they were confirmed by mitoDNA. Is that correct?
I don't know if I would agree with the term accuracy rate because hairs are not unique to an individual. We can't say that a hair came from one person to the exclusion of all others, and therefore it means there could be someone else whose hairs exhibit those same microscopic characteristics. We do mito to get as much information from the hairs that we're examining as possible. So it's possible that the hair that we send to mitochondrial DNA, their results don't agree with ours or theirs differ from ours, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the microscopic association was incorrect.
And out of the 80 microscopic hair comparisons, 9 were found to be from different sources when re-examined through mitochondrial DNA.
That's correct.
I have no further questions for the proffer, Judge.
Mr. Ashton,
I have no further questions. I have no argument.
go ahead.
Your Honor, the proffered portions of this cross-examination appear to be to not impeach the witness's testimony, but to agree with it. The 90.706 indicates that the cross-examination must be on a relevant subject matter. How is it relevant to get the witness to state that other people agree with her? That's bolstering. So I do object to it for that purpose. I also object to the study being discussed since this witness hasn't indicated an identification in this case. So the results of the Badoli study are not relevant to impeach an identification she didn't make.
Anything else? If he wants to bolster her testimony, I let him do it. And the points you brought out about the Perdoli study, you can bring that out on redirect.
But the court is not allowing defense counsel to go into the case-related materials in the.
I'm not going to ask him about it.
For
Ask her
if
about
I could
it.
finish, that would be appreciated.
Well-
Referenced in the journal, the committee, the research council report, correct?
Okay. I know it's Saturday morning, but I think I've made myself abundantly clear about what should not be done. And I firmly believe Mr. Baez heard me.
I will not be discussing any prior cases or results of those cases or anything of the kind, Judge.
Now, you mentioned something about the Menendez case. Was there anything particular you wanted to use that for?
No, sir. I was just using it to explain and to its authoritativeness as to the NAS report.
Okay. All right, let's return to jury. Okay, state recognized presence of jury.
Yes, sir.
Defense.
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay, Mr. Baez, you may continue.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Lowe, we were discussing the history of microscopic hair analysis, as you brought out during your direct examination. And then we began to discuss the National Academy of Sciences report. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I explained, this report was commissioned by our government, Congress.
Asked and answered. Council's already established this with the witness.
Overrule out.
Yes, I believe it was commissioned by Congress.
And what it did was it put together a body of forensic scientists as well as individuals from the court system to try and look for a better way to improve how forensic science is entered into the courtroom.
That's part of it, correct?
Okay. And of course, you consider this report authoritative.
For the purposes of offering suggestions on improvements that could be made, and yes.
And they were highly critical of the...
Objection. It's beyond the proffer.
I got to hear the question.
They were highly critical on the area of microscopic hair analysis, were they not?
Objection. Beyond the proffer.
Overrule.
There were parts of the report that dealt with really the limitation of the science. The report said that hair examinations could not be a means of identification without DNA examination. But hair examinations are never a means of identification unless there's nuclear DNA along with it. So the criticism is really pointing out a limitation of the science, which we agree. So when I testify or when I write a report and I have association, I'll either say or have in my report that hairs are not a means of positive identification, and that an accompanying DNA examination must be conducted, more than likely mitochondrial DNA. So I don't disagree with what's in the report. It's a limitation.
And just to clarify something you just told the jury, when you say DNA, you're referring to, the report refers to nuclear DNA, not mitochondrial, correct?
As far as being able to be individual, saying that this hair came from this individual, that would require nuclear DNA, okay, as opposed to mitochondrial DNA.
And without getting into a DNA lecture, nuclear DNA is more specific, more discriminatory to an individual than mitochondrial, correct?
Mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally, so all of your maternal relatives will have the same mitochondrial DNA. Nuclear DNA is unique to an individual, with the exception of twins.
So to give a real-life example, Casey and Kaylee and Cindy Anthony would all have the same mitochondrial DNA.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the area of this witness's expertise.
Sustained.
Judge, if the witness has knowledge of that, I think she is established through her credentials that she has certain knowledge. In addition to that, this individual does determine which...
Objection.
I've sustained objection.
Are you aware of... Well, I'll strike that. Now, as we were explaining this to the jury, that is the reason why you cannot testify and will not testify that one hair comes from one individual.
That's correct.
And this was a problem that the NAS report addressed in 2009.
Again, they saw it as a criticism, but it's really just a limitation of the science.
But it was a problem that they recognized that they wanted to offer guidance as to how to proceed in the future in the courtroom.
That's correct. They suggested doing accompanying DNA examinations.
Now, this is the very first time you have testified as an expert witness for hair banding. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is.
And you are not an expert in hair, are you?
And the microscopic characteristics and appearance of hairs in comparison.
But not on the growth of hair, any medical characteristics in hair, anything like that?
Those are areas that were touched on in training, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert in the physiology of it, just really the microscopic characteristics.
And as it relates to hair banding, your knowledge, of course, is what you've testified to today as to your qualifications.
My training and experience.
The 6-month training course, that a portion of it went to this topic.
That's correct.
And some on-the-job training where you have given your opinion.
That's correct.
And the 4 articles that you have referenced.
That's correct.
Now, you don't know what causes you don't know what causes post-mortem banding.
No, I don't know what the mechanism is.
You don't know how long it takes to develop.
The studies have shown that in the papers that I mentioned earlier today, it was seen as early as 8 hours after death.
But you don't know how long it takes to develop.
Again, no. The studies showed it as early as 8 hours.
And not everyone who is deceased has post-mortem root banding.
That's correct.
So it just shows up sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
If it comes from a deceased person at all.
As I talked about earlier, the cases that I've worked that were homicide cases, so the known sample was from a deceased individual. You don't always see characteristics of decomposition in those known hairs.
My question was, you don't know if it comes up at all.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
You don't know if it comes up how often on individuals?
In casework in deceased individuals?
In any deceased person?
No.
You don't know the frequency?
No, I don't.
Okay. And the testimony that you've given here today, it's based on a handful of studies, is it not?
A handful of studies as well as training and experience.
Okay. And that training and experience, as we've explained, is you giving your opinion when you have a homicide case on certain hairs.
It's seeing those characteristics present in cases over 13 years.
And the way these articles that you and these studies are conducted is they'll take a specific, they'll do a study on a specific number of variables. And let me explain. For example, they will give you certain scenarios and be able to tell you what the results were for those scenarios, correct?
In some of the papers, yes.
So unless that specific area is studied extensively, you really can't testify as to the accuracy or the level of certainty on this specific topic, postmortem banning.
What I've testified is that there are characteristics that are present are characteristics of apparent decomposition, and I've testified that I cannot say that coming from a dead body is the only possibility. It just, those characteristics, the postmortem root band specifically, have not been replicated in other conditions.
And when you say they haven't been replicated in other conditions, these are only on the limited number of studies that have been done on this topic.
The limited number of studies, and in my casework, I've not seen those characteristics in hairs outside of a known sample or hairs associated with someone who is deceased.
And you have never rendered an opinion on only one hair dealing with postmortem root banding, have you not?
Again, the other cases where I have seen postmortem root banding, those hairs have been associated with someone who is deceased. So this is the first case where that is not the case.
In fact, you requested of the case agent to try and find more hairs in this case to make the case stronger, did you not?
I was informed that there may be vacuumings from the trunk, so additional evidence that was collected from the vehicle beyond the initial items that I received, and I requested those to be submitted to see if there were additional hairs with characteristics of apparent decomposition.
In fact, you stated that if we find more than one hair with decomp, it makes the case stronger that it's from a body rather than from some other random possibility of why one hair would look that way.
That's correct. Just like in any trace evidence, the number of associations increases, the significance increases.
And that's because you had doubts.
No.
You asking for more hairs to try and make your position stronger, correct?
No, just to see if there were additional hairs in that location.
But you specifically stated that that would make the case stronger, that it's from a body rather than some other random possibility as to why the hair would look that way, right?
That's correct. But that doesn't mean that I had doubts that the characteristics that I saw were consistent with apparent decomposition.
And so it's not that you have any doubts, it's just that you would like to make the case stronger?
I wanted to know if there were additional hairs with those characteristics.
And your request for this information was just for no reason whatsoever?
Objection. Asked and answered.
Sustained.
Now, you did actually get more hairs, did you not?
I did.
And do you have your file with you? Okay. When was the next time you got some hairs? Actually, if we can, here's what I'd like to do, Ms. Lowe. We'll start with your first report on August 1st, 2008, and then we'll move forward from there. Is that okay?
Yes.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Okay, I have my report.
Okay. Now, there were multiple hairs that you were given for the first report, were there not?
There were 12 items that were submitted that were identified as coming from a vehicle.
And that included multiple hairs?
Some of the items, yes.
Okay. And these hairs were of different characteristics?
Some were.
Okay. So there's no allegations or anything as far as you're aware with this report, with this case, there were multiple people in the trunk of that car?
The only hair that I compared to any known samples was the hair that showed characteristics of apparent decomposition.
Okay. And when you did the analysis, none of the other, how many hairs did you examine on August 1st, for the August 1st report?
Again, I don't have a total number. 11 of the 12 items at least had some hairs.
Okay. So throughout all of those hairs, you found no other confirmation on that one hair?
There were no other hairs that exhibited characteristics of apparent decomposition.
And then you did another report on August 6th, correct?
That's correct.
And you examined those items of evidence.
I did.
And could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what those results were?
The items that were submitted for my August 6th report were pieces of trunk liner and other items that were identified as coming from the vehicle where the initial 12 items were found, and none of the hairs present on these items exhibited characteristics of apparent decomposition.
Subsequent to that report, you did another report on August 13th. Would that be the next one?
Yes.
August 13th, you were given multiple items of clothing that belonged to Miss Anthony.
That's how they were identified, yes.
Okay. And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you found, what your conclusions were on that report?
Testimonies to items that are not in evidence.
Sustain.
You did another report on August 6th, did you not? I'm sorry, October 6th.
Yes. 2008, yes.
And you were given multiple items to inspect and multiple hairs to inspect in that report, right?
Additional items and vacuum sweepings identified as coming from a vehicle were submitted.
And tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the results were of that report.
The hairs found on these items, none of the hairs found on these items exhibited characteristics of apparent decomposition.
October 15th. Completed a report on that date. Correct?
That's correct.
Sorry. And you were given items of evidence to examine for decomposition there, correct?
There was a single item in the submission, yes.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the results were of that examination?
No hairs with apparent decomposition were found.
October 21st, you conducted another examination.
Yes.
And you examined hair in that report.
I did.
And could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your results were for that report?
No hairs with the characteristics of apparent decomposition were found.
November 6th, you were given more items, were you not?
Yes, I was.
And you found more hairs, correct?
That's correct.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your results were of that examination?
Counsel, please specify the source of these items, whether they come from the car. If they come from the car, I have no objection. If they're otherwise, then I do.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Sure. On your November 6th report, you were given items that were found in the trash bag and on debris of paper towels, were you not?
That's how they're identified, yes.
And it's your understanding that these came from the vehicle of Miss Anthony?
That's how they're identified.
And you examined hairs for that in that scenario, correct?
I did.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your results were there?
No hairs with apparent characteristics of apparent decomposition were found.
Can you give... Actually, if I can hold on just a second. Okay, I'd like to now take you to your report of June 25th, 2009. And I know there are multiple items that were not found in the car, but I'd only like for you to address the ones that were found in the car, which I believe you address on page 7 of your report. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury of those hairs that you examined and what the results were?
Could counsel indicate what items he's referring to make sure that...
Sustain, rephrase your question.
Only those relating to the vehicle.
The same request. I would like to be able to...
Sure. Q319 through
Can I look over counsel's...
Q... Sure.
Would that be all right?
Yes, you may. 337.
No problem.
Q,
We would be happy to offer stipulation if it would move things along, if I could approach.
we're just about done anyway, Judge.
Okay.
To continue.
No problem.
Q319 all the way through Q329. You examined all of those pieces of evidence, did you not, that came from the car?
I did. I would actually go to 337.
Oh, correct, sorry. And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you found in that exam?
On those items, no hairs with characteristics of apparent decomposition were found.
Were there any other items that you inspected from the car that we have not discussed?
In this report, there are actually 4 other items, Q242 through 244 and 248 through 248.4. Those are also identified as coming from the vehicle.
Okay, and you inspected those hairs?
If there were hairs found, yes.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury as to what your findings were?
There were no hairs with apparent decomposition found on those items.
So, just so we're certain, after you had sent in the request on August 1st, 2008, to make the case stronger, the law enforcement assisted you by giving you multiple pieces of evidence to inspect multiple hairs, correct?
There were numerous items that were submitted after that first submission, correct?
Can you give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury an idea of how many hairs, additional hairs, that they were able to give to you after you made that request for more hairs?
I don't keep a number. A large number of the items that were submitted did have hairs present.
And you couldn't make the case stronger because there were no other hairs with apparent decomposition, were there?
Argumentative.
Sustain.
Did were there any other hairs that were at any time given to you after that request that showed apparent signs of decomposition?
Other than any associated with the remains, no.
And I'm referring to the car,
Oh,
right? So we're clear.
Okay, there were a number of items submitted from a number of locations.
Right, but nothing from the car showed any other than the Q12, showed any signs of human decomposition.
That's correct.
And that one hair is still something that you cannot say came from a dead person.
I can't say absolutely that that's the reason the characteristics are present, correct.
If I can have just one moment, Judge, I want to see if I have any other questions. Now, there are no standards in identifying what is and what is not postmortem root banding, correct?
It's a visual assessment, that's correct.
It's someone's opinion,
Correct.
and in this case, it's just your opinion.
This conclusion was confirmed by another examiner in my unit.
Okay. But you're stating here today your opinion.
That's correct.
And there are no error rates or anything like that as it relates to the identification of this banding.
That's correct.
Now, the time that you inspected this hair, it was on August 1st of 2008, or just a couple days before?
I believe. I'll check my notes for the date. July 31st, and I did a comparison to the known sample identified as coming from Casey Anthony on August 1st, 2008.
And when you do these inspections, the post-mortem root banding is supposed to be at the root, correct?
In the root portion of the hair.
And the hair that we're talking about today, the darkened area is slightly above the root, is it not?
It is, and it's consistent with the photographs that were shown on the poster.
Okay. But you didn't show this jury a photograph of that hair, did you, today?
Of the what hair?
Of the hair that we're all talking about.
Q12, no.
Okay. And the reason for that is because the banding is a little bit higher than the root, is it not?
Your Honor, the decision may approach. Relevance, I need to
Okay.
approach.
Okay, Mr. Baez, you may continue, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Lowe, did you participate in any meetings to try and develop ways to reinforce that post-mortem root banding comes from a dead body?
No meetings specifically regarding that topic, no.
Any, what exactly do you mean, no meeting specifically? Is there something close to that you wouldn't classify as a meeting?
Well, this topic may have been addressed in papers given at meetings that I've been to, but not a meeting to discuss ways to strengthen the meeting. And, you know, really at the end of the day, I think the most that we'll be able to say is that it's consistent with apparent decomposition. I don't know that the science will get to the point of being able to say this means it's from a dead body.
Now, we've been discussing a bit about this hair, and that you said it's the darkened area is at the root portion of the hair, correct?
That's correct.
And this hair has the root portion attached to it.
It does.
Now, part of your job after examining a hair would be to make a determination as to where the hair should go next for what other examinations.
If a hair has been associated, yes.
Okay. And at the time you examined this hair, you didn't know who it belonged to.
I made a determination that it was similar to a hair in a hairbrush that was identified as belonging to Kaylee Anthony.
Right. You didn't know who it belonged to.
To the exclusion of all others, no.
And you didn't know the circumstances surrounding this brush or its background.
That's correct. It was identified as belonging to Kaylee.
And were you told anything about whether this hair was used by Casey and Kaylee or just Kaylee?
Hearsay.
She can simply answer the question, was she told yes or no, but no details?
Again, it was identified as belonging to Kaylee.
Okay. Were you told about any issues as to whether Cindy Anthony had given a brush
Hearsay.
that...
Sustained.
The child was still missing at the time, was she not?
That's correct.
And an identification of this hair would have been, and to who it belonged to, would have been critical to the case.
The examinations were limited to hairs exhibiting characteristics of apparent decomposition due to the common environment, so just finding a hair would not have been meaningful given the common environment.
And when you say that, you're talking about the fact that since it's a common environment, there's multiple reasons of how that hair could have ended up there.
How other hairs may have, yes.
And when you can actually do nuclear DNA testing if you have the root of a hair, can you not?
If there's tissue present, yes.
Okay. So you have this missing child, and you have this hair that you say has banding at the root and includes a root. It's not sent to nuclear DNA to confirm that it was Kaylee's, correct?
Objection assumes a fact, not an evidence.
Sustained.
You never made a determination or sent this hair for nuclear DNA testing, did you not?
That's correct. There was no tissue present at the root.
Okay. But you're, of course, not a DNA analyst, aren't you?
I'm not a DNA analyst, no.
And the person to make that determination and to actually test this root for DNA would have been a DNA analyst, not you, correct?
Compound question. Make a determination.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
You're not the one that makes that call.
It actually is part of my job to determine if an associated hair might go to either nuclear DNA or mitochondrial DNA. I may ask for a conference with the DNA examiner if there's a hair with a very small amount of tissue, if I'm unsure whether or not they would be able to get a DNA sequence from that amount of material.
And the DNA analyst is the right person to actually attempt to extract DNA from that root. Would it not be?
To extract the DNA, correct.
Okay. And to attempt to find out the identity of who that hair belongs to.
If DNA could have been obtained from that hair, yes.
Okay. So the best that we have at this point is that the hair either belonged to Kaylee, Casey, Cindy, or even Cindy's mother. Any other maternal relative.
Correct.
Now, you mentioned about the hair having limited value because of the common environment, correct?
No.
Okay. You mentioned a determination was not made because of the common environment.
For other hairs within the vehicle.
Right. Now, finding hairs in the trunk of a vehicle is not uncommon.
That's correct.
In fact, people shed hairs quite often, do they not?
Average person loses 100 head hairs per day.
And they lose them everywhere.
Probably the majority are lost during grooming, but you do shed hairs and transfer hairs, yes.
And you have hair on your clothing, correct?
You may.
And if you, as it relates to evidence, shed a hair from one individual to another, that would be called transfer, correct?
That's correct.
And if one individual's hair ends up on someone else, and then they shed that hair somewhere or leave that hair somewhere, that's called secondary transfer, is it not?
That's correct.
And that is often found in many cases that you've worked on.
I never really know if the hairs have gotten in a particular place due to primary or secondary transfer, only that they're present.
But it's certainly something you consider when analyzing casework.
Yes.
And the reason you would want more hairs is to eliminate the possibility that that hair got there from either primary or secondary transfer, correct?
If there were a large number of hairs in a location, it would suggest primary, but I still couldn't say that it was a result of a primary transfer.
So I guess to put that in plain English, because we only have one hair, primary or secondary transfer cannot be eliminated. In fact, it's the most likely scenario here.
Objection, compound question.
Sustained, rephrase the question.
Because you only have one hair, there's a strong likelihood that that hair got there by either primary or secondary transfer.
I couldn't say how the hair got there.
But
Either primary or secondary, I don't know.
then I'll use one of your favorite words, consistent with.
It's consistent with transfer and contact of some sort, but I don't know from whom.
Thank you.
Redirect.
The comments in the National Academy of Science report that Mr. Baez talked to you, are those consistent with long-standing FBI policy?
Yes. As far as the determination that we can't say a hair is from one person to the exclusion of all others, a statement has been in reports as far back that I've seen as far back as the 70s, where if an association is made, there's an accompanying statement saying this hair exams are not a means of positive identification. And as soon as mitochondrial DNA was available to us, we began to use that in cases where associations were found.
All right. So the commentary in the report that counsel was talking about is something that you all have been doing for years.
That's correct.
And in fact, your report, which came out about a year before the NAS report, contains that caveat.
That's correct.
The particular hair in this case, the one with the apparent decomposition near the root end, did you say that was an anagen hair?
It's not a telogen hair. It's difficult. An anagen hair typically refers to one that's been forcibly removed, and this may have not been forcibly removed, but it's not a telogen hair. Okay,
just so the jury remembers the terms. Telogen means one that naturally was shed.
That's correct.
So this hair was not naturally shed.
That's correct.
So the hundreds of hairs that Mr. Baez was talking about that we all shed, this is not one of those.
Right. This hair didn't exhibit that club shape or kind of Q-tip looking root.
Yeah, and this is why you said it was still in that growth stage, which is why part of the keratin is softer. That's what
correct.
You're talking about. Okay.
That's correct.
Now, to sum this whole thing up, you looked at a lot of hairs in this case, and you found one with apparent decomposition. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Now, mitochondrial DNA, you discussed briefly with counsel, is a method by which DNA in a part of the hair is examined, and basically everybody in the maternal line would have the same mitochondrial DNA. I think you said that, correct?
That's correct.
So basically, a child, the child's mother, the child's maternal uncles and aunts would have the same DNA, mitochondrial,
Anyone who's maternally related, yes.
the grandmother, and on up the line.
Correct.
The combination of microscopic examination and mitochondrial, though, are helpful in eliminating other maternal relatives by microscopic examination.
That's correct.
Sustain.
In this case, did you eliminate the defendant, victim's mother, as a possible source of the hair with a decomp root?
That hair was microscopically dissimilar to the known head hair sample identified as coming from Casey Anthony's, so it was not consistent with originating from Casey Anthony.
But it could be from any maternal relative who had 9-inch long, light brown to brown hair.
If there was another relative whose hairs had the same microscopic characteristics, then I might not be able to distinguish them.
Well, I mean, if there's a maternal relative who has blonde hair, can that person be excluded just by seeing them?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Was that hair treated in any way?
The Q12 hair was not.
It was untreated.
Correct.
The defendant's hair, was it treated?
The known sample hairs were, yes.
The hair that you got from the hairbrush, which, as I indicated, purportedly the hair of Kaylee Anthony, was that a naturally shed hair?
I'd have to look at my notes.
If you need to, go ahead.
It's actually not listed in my notes, so I don't know.
You don't know? But did that hair have the root banding that you found in the Q12 hair?
It did not.
So if that is, in fact, Kaylee Anthony's actual hair, her natural hair would not have that band.
As represented by the hair in the hairbrush, correct?
Again, assuming that is her hair, it's purported to be. So whatever happened to the hair, assuming it is Kaylee's, was not something that was natural to her hair, assuming that's her hair. That was a really bad question. I'm sorry. That was really awful. Let me start over again. The hair banding you found in the Q12 hair, assuming that it is Kaylee's hair, and assuming that the hair in the hairbrush is also Kaylee's hair, whatever happened to the Q12 hair was not natural to Kaylee's hair.
Kaylee's hair is being represented by the hair from the hairbrush, correct?
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Recross as to those issues.
A pooled hair is more likely to contain tissue, does it not?
Potentially.
And that would assist you in actually doing nuclear DNA, correct?
If tissue is present, nuclear DNA could be attempted.
And it's your testimony that this was pooled hair, so therefore there's a greater likelihood that it would have had the tissue.
Assumes the fact not in evidence, in fact, contrary to what it said.
So,
Sustain.
now, you don't know how long that hair had been in that location.
That's correct.
And you don't know if the history of Miss Anthony's hair treatments, do you?
No, I just know the hairs that I got in the known hair sample.
And that's all you can base it on. You can't base it on Cindy Anthony's hair, previous hair, or whether that was treated, or Casey Anthony's, or any other maternal person.
Correct. Only the known sample that I received.
And even at the end of the day, you still can't say that that hair came from a dead body.
That's correct. It has characteristics that are consistent with that, but I can't say absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
May the witness be excused.
As far as the state is concerned, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. You may be excused. Y'all need to y'all need to discuss that afterwards.
That would be fine. We can discuss it.
Y'all can discuss it. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, state may call in next witness.
solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, ma'am, I do. Pardon me? Mike Vincent, V-I-N-C-E-N-T.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Please tell us your occupation.
I'm with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. I am an assistant supervisor of the crime scene unit.
How long have you worked for Orange County?
I worked for Orange County for 9 years.
Do you have experience working with other law enforcement agencies prior to Orange County?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I am a retired Philadelphia police officer. I did 21 years with the Philadelphia Police Department. I did 5 years in patrol, 5 years in narcotics, and my last 11 years was with the Philadelphia Police Crime Scene Unit.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about your background and training as it relates to crime scene investigation?
I have a high school education in electronics. Right after high school, I entered the Air Force, and I served in the Air Force for 8 years in law enforcement. After the Air Force, I went to the Philadelphia Police Department, and while in the crime scene unit with the Philadelphia Police Department and with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, I have attended over 30 crime scene-related schools, some lasting 3 days, some lasting 2 weeks.
You indicated that your service at the Orange County Sheriff's Office is in some form of management.
Yes, ma'am. As
a supervisor?
Assistant supervisor, yes, ma'am.
Right. Would one of the individuals that you supervise be Gerardo Bloise?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, it would.
Okay. In July of 2008, what was your position with the Orange County Sheriff's Office?
I was assistant supervisor of Squad 20.
Including, at that point as well, Mr. Bloise?
Correct. He was in Squad 20 with me.
Did you assist him in processing certain aspects associated with a white Pontiac Sunfire?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did that assistance include taking samples of some sort from the vehicle?
Yes, it did.
All right. Can you just give us a general overview of the different types of samples that you collected from the vehicle?
I initially collected stain samples to check to see if there was any blood inside the trunk liner of the vehicle. I did 3 separate tests, one on each side and one in the middle, which came out negative. And I also collected air samples from the vehicle.
All right. Did you also collect pieces of carpeting from the trunk?
Yes, I did. On the spare tire cover, I collected a couple samples of the stain that was in the carpet itself and placed it in tin cans.
Now, you had mentioned taking air samples from the trunk.
Yes, ma'am.
Did the collection of air samples from the trunk begin on July 21st of 2008?
Yes, it did.
Were you assisted in that endeavor by individuals with the University of Central Florida?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury how air samples, how the process of collecting air samples began?
The first time we attempted to collect air samples, Dr. Michael Sigmund from the University of Florida, National Center for Forensic Science, was assisting. He had a large syringe, and what he tried to do was insert it through the trunk seal rather than open up the trunk because he was going to suck the air into the large syringe. We were unable to do that, so we cracked open the trunk as little as possible to get the syringe in there and then closed the trunk, and he was able to suck out the air that was in there. He then transferred the air from the syringe into a plastic bag, a Teflon bag, I believe they call it, and he transferred the air into two bags. And he also hung a filter inside the trunk of the vehicle. After we were successful in getting the air out of there, we opened up the trunk and he hung a filter in there, and we closed the trunk again to see if the air would absorb into the filter.
You observed this process?
Yes, he performed the process and I was there observing.
As a result of this endeavor, did you collect an item that was ultimately shipped to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee?
Yes.
If I may have JN for identification. Let me show you what's been marked as JN for identification. Take a look at that packaging and tell me if you recognize it as something that you've had contact with in the past.
Yes, it is.
How do you recognize the item?
This is the label that I placed on the front of this envelope. This is our tape, our evidence tape that we sealed the envelope. This is my initials on the tape itself.
After the process that you described, did you take the Teflon bag and place it into this envelope and seal it?
Yes, I did.
Did you also, at that point or the next day, take a sample from the stained area of the spare tire cover?
Yes.
If I may have IR for identification. Let me have you take a look at the item IR for identification. Tell me if you recognize it and how so.
Yes, I recognize this. Again, this is my label that I placed on this in this tin can of the item and identifying the item that's inside the can. And this is our evidence tape with my initials. After it's sealed, I initialed it.
Do you place a date on the seal as it relates to the collection as well?
Yes.
What date?
7/22.
That item in IR for identification in the can that I had just showed you, did you transfer that item to the Oak Ridge National Laboratories once you sealed it?
Yes, it was shipped there. Yes.
On July 23rd of 2008, did you conduct another effort to collect air samples from the vehicle?
I observed the collection. Correct. There was another attempt at collecting the air samples. Yes.
All right. How did this attempt differ from the first? What was the process used on that attempt on July 23rd, 2008?
What we did was, it was again done by Dr. Michael Sigmund. What we did was opened up the trunk. We hung in two different types of filters, a carbon filter and another type of filter, and we closed the trunk and let that in there for approximately, I believe it was 40 minutes. and then he opened up the trunk and collected the samples.
All right, if I may have J.O. for identification. This was a process that you observed?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you take a look at the packaging of J.O. for identification. Tell me if you recognize the exterior, and if so, how.
Yes, I recognize this. Again, this is my label that I put on the front of the envelope, identifying what's inside the envelope, and this is my evidence tape with my initials on it again.
Does the seal where you've placed your initials indicate the date that the item was collected?
No, it does not.
Okay. Does the front somehow have some indication on the label as to the date and time of collection?
The date, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what was the date on that item?
7/23 of 08.
Once that item is collected and sealed by you, is this another item that was ultimately transferred to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that's the one that went to Oak Ridge in Tennessee.
On August 29th of 2008, did you conduct another examination of the trunk to collect samples from it?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. Prior to the collection actually occurring, did you receive equipment from another individual with instructions on how to do the collection?
Yes, I did, from Dr. Voss from the Oak Ridge Laboratories in Tennessee.
All right. What was sent to you for collection purposes?
What he had sent to me was a portable air pump, 9 test tubes, and instructions on how to collect air samples and where to collect the air samples from.
All right. Did you, in fact, utilize the materials sent to you by Dr. Voss in the collection of additional samples on Friday, August 29th?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Or on August 29th and August 30th of 2008?
August 29th, I did air samples from the vehicle, and August 30th, I did air samples from the trash that was collected from the vehicle.
Explain to the jury how that process took place.
On the piece of equipment that he sent me, it was a square box approximately this size, maybe 9 by 12, and it was about 4 inches thick. It had 2 latches on the front, which the lid opened up. Inside was some switches and batteries. Coming out of the side of the box were 2 tubes, rubber tubes, and on the end of the tubes were a nut with threads on it, the female side of a nut. The test tubes that he gave me were approximately 2 3/4 inches long, about 1/4 inch thick. Each one of them had the male side of the nuts on each end. And what I was to do was to set up the equipment and then attach the test tube to the 2 hoses coming out, and then turn the pump on for a certain amount of time, and from each area that I did.
Now, you mentioned this process occurring in different areas of the vehicle.
Not only the vehicle, but the garage that the vehicle, or bay that the vehicle was parked in. I took air samples of the garage itself.
If I may have NF, NG, NH, NI, NJ, NK, NL, and NM for identification. I'll show you these items as a group. have you take a look at all of them and indicate whether you've had some contact with the item in the past. And if you can keep them in order, that would greatly assist you.
Yes, I recognize these.
How do you recognize them?
These are envelopes that I packaged each individual test tube in for shipping. My label is on the front identifying what's inside the envelope. The evidence tape on the back is our unit evidence tape. My initials are not on this particular envelope because what I did was placed all these into one single envelope and I sealed and initialed the other envelope.
Let me start with the top item, which is NF for identification. If you could just identify the area where this was collected and the collection time.
This is from the passenger area of the vehicle, the interior side of the vehicle. It was collected at approximately 15:02 hours on the 29th of August.
How long did the collection process take?
I collected this item for approximately 69 minutes.
NG for identification. Same questions. Can you tell us from where this sample was taken, when, and how long the collection time was?
Again, this is from the passenger area of the vehicle, and it was 69 minutes. This is like I said earlier, there's two tubes that come out of the box, and I attached a trap to each tube.
NH for identification. Where was that collection from?
This was from the trash found inside the vehicle, inside the trash bag. This was collected for approximately 72 minutes, and it was collected on August 30th, the next day, at approximately 13:28 hours.
And the length of collection time?
72 minutes.
NI for identification?
This one was collected from inside the trunk area. What I did was place the equipment inside the trunk, shut the trunk lid, and allowed the machine to run for approximately 69 minutes, and this occurred on the 29th of August at approximately 16:29 hours.
NJ for identification?
Again, this is from the trash that was collected from the vehicle. It was collected on, the 30th of August, and it started at approximately 13:28 hours, and it lasted for 72 minutes.
NK for identification?
This was a test that was conducted on the air inside our garage where the vehicle was located. I allowed the machine to run for 77 minutes, and this was conducted on August 30th, and it was started at approximately 9:03 in the morning.
And L for identification?
This is what we call a standard or blank test. What we do is the traps that were shipped to me were not. This one was not used. It was kept in its container, and it was shipped back to Oak Ridge in that condition. And we do that so during shipment, if there's any contaminations picked up, then this one would be the one that would pick it up because it's a clean specimen.
And NM for identification?
Again, this was from our garage. The air that's in our garage, it was tested on August 30th at approximately 9:03, and it was tested for approximately 77 minutes.
After those items were collected and sealed in these envelopes, What happened to them?
They were shipped back to the Oak Ridge Laboratory, Dr. Voss.
On September 27th, did you collect items from the spare tire, or an item, from the spare tire wheel well and ultimately shipped to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory?
Yes.
Okay, JM for identification. Take a look at that and tell me if you recognize it as something you've had contact with in the past.
I recognize this, yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
This was there was a substance on the surface of the inside of the spare tire well. It was scraped and put in a plastic container, and it was shipped off to Dr. Voss. I believe it was, I'm almost positive this one went to Dr. Voss.
After the collection, do you recognize the initials on the seal?
Yes,
And whose initials are those?
Gerardo Blazes.
Did you collect other pieces of the spare tire cover on October 30th of 2008?
Yes,
Did you also collect a section of the spare tire cover that was not stained?
yes.
What was the purpose of that?
Again, that's what we call for a controlled sample. It was an area of the spare tire cover that did not have a stain on it, so that could be analyzed.
Okay. If I may have IP and IQ for identification. Let me show you what's been marked as IP for identification. Have you take a look at this item and tell me if you recognize it as something you've had contact with in the past?
Yes.
How do you recognize it?
Again, this is my label identifying what's inside the can. This was placed in here on October 30th at approximately 16:30 hours. It was sealed with evidence tape, and my initials are on the top of the tape.
After that item is collected, is it shipped to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee?
Yes.
Let me show you IQ for identification. Tell me if that's something that you recognize as having had contact with in the past.
Yes.
How do you recognize it?
Again, this is my label on the front, identifying what's inside the can, and this is not taped. I do not have evidence tape or my initials on this one.
Okay. What is that one identified as?
This is identified as a 2.5 by 2 piece of stained spare tire cover.
The other item was identified as
A 6-inch by 6-inch piece of stained spare tire cover.
which was the item that was the control sample?
The second one, the small one.
The smaller piece?
Yes.
Did you also assist Mr. Bloise in other aspects of the crime scene investigation?
Yes.
Okay. Would that have included taking standards of hair and DNA from George Anthony, Cindy Anthony, and Lee Anthony?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were the standards taken from George and Cindy Anthony on October 7th of 2008?
I believe that was the date, yes.
The standards from Lee Anthony, were those taken on October 8th of 2008?
Yes, ma'am. The next day I took them from Lee.
If I may have items IW, IX, IY, IZ, JA, and JB for identification. Are these samples collected in identical fashion?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. Are these samples collected in identical fashion from each individual?
Yes.
Okay. How is it that the DNA samples are collected from each of these individuals?
What we done was we took them into a room where we collect samples, and I collected the buccal swabs and then collected the hair swabs, or the hair samples from them. They either assisted me in retrieving the hairs themselves, or I collected the hair.
All right. How was the buccal swab collection done? How do you do that?
What's done is we take 2 Q-tips and we swab the inside of the mouth to get the skin cells that's located inside your mouth. We swab each side, and then we place them in boxes and seal them and ship them.
Okay. And the hair samples that are collected, are those pulled or otherwise shed?
No, they're pulled hairs.
All right. And how were those collected? You indicated that sometimes the individual will assist you.
Yes. If I collect them, I'll use tweezers. Sometimes I'll give the individual that is I'm taking the sample from, I'll let them use the tweezers, or they'll just pull the hair out with their fingers.
Okay. What happens to the item after they're collected?
It's placed in a clear plastic Petri dish, a round dish, and then it's sealed.
All right. If I may approach the witness with JB, IY, and IX for identification.
You may.
Take a look at each of those items and tell me if you recognize them as something that you've had contact with in the past. And then we'll do them individually.
Yes, I do recognize these.
What do you recognize IX to be?
These are 2 buccal swabs taken from Cindy Anthony.
Once they are collected from Mrs. Anthony in the manner described, do they go into that packaging?
Yes, they're in a box. The box actually gets sealed, then they're placed in this envelope, and this envelope is sealed with my initials.
IY? What do you recognize that to be?
This is 2 buccal swabs collected from George Anthony.
Once those items are collected in the manner described, they go into a sealed box, into a sealed package.
Yes, ma'am, they do.
And JB for identification.
These are 2 buccal swabs collected from Lee Anthony.
Same series of questions. Once they're collected from him, do they go into a sealed box and sealed package initialed by you?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
I'm going to show you IZ, JA, and IW for identification with the court's permission. Do you recognize each of those items as something you've had contact with in the past?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
What do you recognize IZ to be?
This is 1 Petri dish containing hairs from George Anthony.
Once those items were collected, were they placed into the Petri dish, sealed, placed into the container, sealed, and initialed by you?
Yes, they are.
JA for identification.
This is 1 Petri dish containing hairs from Lee Anthony.
Once those were collected, were they placed into the Petri dish, sealed, placed into the envelope, sealed, and initialed by you?
Yes, ma'am, they were.
And IW for identification.
This is 1 Petri dish containing hairs from Cindy Anthony.
Once collected, is the Petri dish sealed, placed into the envelope, sealed again, and initialed by you?
Yes, ma'am, they were.
On August 1st of 2008, did you respond to the Anthony home at 4937 Hope Spring Drive and collect items described as gas cans?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
All right. If I may have AJ for identification. Sir, do you see AJ for identification displayed on the monitor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what do you recognize it to be?
This is 1 of 2 gas cans that I collected from the house.
Okay. How is it that you can recall the collection date and time?
Located in the picture is a identification card, and the card has my name, the case number, the time, and the date.
Is that photograph a fair and accurate depiction of that item on August 1st of 2008 at 11:30 hours?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Your Honor, at this point I would seek to introduce AJ for identification into evidence.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
Permission to publish 107 to the jury, Your Honor.
You may publish.
Investigator Vincent, is there anything that you did to change or alter the appearance of the gas can from the time that you collected it at the Anthony residence until the time of the photograph?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Okay. What happened to this item after you photographed it?
What I did was I swabbed the gas can for any DNA, and I also conducted a latent examination on the gas can to see if I could get any fingerprints off the gas can.
Were you successful?
No, I was not.
Was the item returned to the Anthony family on Hope Spring Drive?
Yes, it was.
When?
I'd have to look at my report.
Your Honor, may the witness refresh his recollection with his report as to the time he returned the item.
Yes, you may.
If I may refer you to page 5 of your report above the date of, above the August 12th date. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it does.
And when was that item returned?
August 13th at 11:03 hours.
To whom?
Cindy Anthony.
Your Honor, at this time, I would seek to introduce IW, IX, IY, IZ, JA, and JB for identification into evidence identified by the witness as hair and buccal swab standards.
What says the defense? You may.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I have a moment?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Those are all the questions I have of this witness at this point.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vincent.
Good afternoon, sir.
Sir, when you did the process the car on July 17th of 2008, and you checked for blood, you testified about that, correct?
Correct.
And while you were doing that, that was caught on television, was it not?
The Bay Area was on television, and the vehicle was on television, but the collection of the blood or attempt to see if there was blood inside the car was not on television.
What happened was you were processing the car that evening,
Correct.
and you had the garage door open,
Correct.
and you and Mr. Bloisey were processing the car with Blue Star.
That was one of the processes we did, correct.
And there was a television crew filming you while you were doing this.
Correct.
And you could see their lights from their cameras because it was at night, could you not?
I don't believe they had lights on at that time.
Did you call the media so they could film you?
I did not call the media.
Do you know who did?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the relevance.
Sustained.
Are you aware if it was the intent to have the media film you while you processed the car?
It was whose intent?
Whether it was
I would object if he's asking him as to someone's intent other than his own.
Sustained. Rephrase your question.
This was immediately broadcasted throughout the country, was it not?
Objection, relevance.
Sustain.
The samples that you were talking about with the air this is the very first time you've ever taken air samples, correct?
Yes, sir, it was.
In fact, you have no training whatsoever in the collection or preservation of air samples.
This is the first time I ever heard it being done. That's correct.
And you had never heard of this ever being done in any cases prior to this one.
That's correct.
And this for you was somewhat of an experiment.
It was new. I wouldn't call it an experiment.
Okay. Mr. Sigmund, that came and took the samples that you witnessed, this was the first time he had collected air samples, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
If you're aware.
This wouldn't be based on anything other than hearsay.
Sustain.
There were multiple attempts to try and collect samples, right?
Yes.
Just couldn't seem to do it correctly?
No, that wasn't the case at all.
You weren't sure if you were doing it correctly?
No, that wasn't the case at all.
Okay. It was the first time you were doing it, but you were certain you were doing it correctly?
Which time are we talking about?
Multiple times. You have the 17th and the 23rd, correct? You did it on?
The 17th of
July?
and the 23rd of?
July.
They were not attempted by me at all. They were done by Dr. Michael Sigmund.
And is it your understanding that they were being done correctly, or they had to come back and try something new?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Any response be based on hearsay.
Sustain.
You were part of this process, were you not?
I observed the process, correct.
And there were multiple methods employed in trying to collect air sample, were there not?
There were different types of filters used to collect the air sample, yes.
First, there was the syringe.
Correct.
Then there was the little carbon filters.
Correct.
And then after that, in August, you got sent a pump from Mr. Voss.
And that is the sample that I collected, correct.
Now, the difficulty that you had is in collecting air samples is that air is a free-flowing thing, is it not?
Air is free-flowing, but I don't understand what you mean by difficult.
Okay. Well, let me rephrase it let me put it this way. The air in the garage of your forensic bay was not the same on July 16th as it was August 29th, was it?
It wasn't the same air. Whether it was the same quality of air, I couldn't tell you that.
Okay. And that's because you open the garage door, air comes in and air goes out.
Correct.
And that's the same thing with this car, correct?
Correct. The air would leave and the air would stay, yes.
You don't have any information as to the air in this car on June 16th, correct?
Correct.
And you don't have any information as to the air in the garage of the Anthony family.
Correct.
And you certainly didn't do any samples of the garage in the Anthony family home.
That's correct.
And furthermore, at the tow yard where this car was for 3 weeks, you didn't do any samples of the air over there, did you?
No.
Nor near the dumpster where this car was for 3 days.
Correct.
Now, the samples that you took on August 29th, they were not air samples that, actually, let me rephrase that. Mr. Sigmund took the samples on the 23rd, correct? Of July.
Yes.
And then on August 29th, you attempted to get what are called control samples.
I don't understand that question. No, I don't think that's correct. No.
You attempted to get samples of various different environments, not just the car.
Correct.
So you could compare the sample from the forensic bay garage versus the car.
I can't compare it, no.
That was the purpose of you collecting air samples from the forensic bay of the garage, was it not?
I don't,
Let me rephrase this.
Thank you.
See if I can help you. I apologize for the question. The forensic bay air from your garage, it's not an item of evidence in this case.
the forensics bay air that I collected
Yeah.
is evidence.
Okay. There's no dispute in fact or anything having to do with the air from your garage at the forensics bay.
There's no dispute. I don't understand what you mean.
Maybe let me see if I can rephrase it to see if I help you. The reason you took sample from the air of the forensic bay and from the car and then also from the garbage is that you could compare, so others could compare the difference in the air from one location to the other, right?
I wouldn't say difference. I think what the tests were conducted for, to see what was in the air at that particular location, like what was in the air in the garage, what was in the air in the trunk, and what was in the air in the trash.
Right. So
Correct.
that way you can have a better indication as to whether the air from the garage made it into the trunk and vice versa.
Correct. Okay.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Okay.
Okay. Now, but the problem is you took this on August 29th, correct?
Yes, sir.
You didn't take it on you didn't take it on June 16th.
Correct.
You didn't take it on July 15th when you first got the car.
Correct.
It was done a month and a half later
Correct.
for air that is free-flowing.
Correct.
So the samples that you collected are not representative of what the air was like in that car on July 15th or June 16th of 2008.
What I think was being collected for was the odor coming from the area and the items that were tested.
My question to you, sir, is it's not a representative sample of what you're trying to accomplish. Isn't that correct?
I don't understand the question.
I'm going to object. He's asking for a scientific conclusion that's outside the scope of his stated expertise at this point.
Well, objection sustained. The witness has indicated that he does not understand the question, which means the question is valid.
All right. You also sampled the garbage, correct?
Yes, an air sample was taken of the garbage.
Okay.
I'm sorry, trash.
The trash.
Correct.
Okay. We got into that yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what you did was you didn't take a sample of the trash on July 15th, right?
Correct.
You did it on August 29th.
Yes, sir.
But there was a significant difference in the trash from the 16th of July to the 29th of August, correct?
There was a what?
There was a significant difference.
There could have been.
Okay. In fact,
I wouldn't be able to tell because I didn't test it on the 16th. So I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the 16th and the 28th when I tested.
but there was something done to the trash when you got it on the 16th, right?
I didn't get it on the 16th.
Okay, the 17th of July. Let me start from the top. You got the trash in the forensics department on July 16th, 2008.
Okay.
And that trash was then taken to a dry room, was it not?
I don't know if it was immediately taken to the dry room or not.
Okay. I'd like to show you Defense Exhibit C, if I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
Now, without showing this to the jury, unfortunately, this is not admitted into evidence, sir. The photograph on the left shows how the garbage was when you received it, correct?
I can't answer that. I wasn't there when it was received.
Does that look like the garbage when you first saw it?
It does look like the trash, yes.
And the photograph on the right is after it was placed in the dry room, is it not?
I can't answer that question. That's not a dry room. To me, it looks like it's being laid out to be inspected.
Do you see a significant difference between the trash on the left and the trash on the right?
Of course.
And what's the purpose of putting trash in the dry room?
I didn't put it in the dry room. You'll have to ask Gerardo Blasi, who put it in the dry room, what his reason was.
But you're his supervisor, right?
Correct?
And you have experience in crime scene investigation, do you not?
Yes.
What would be the purpose of putting trash in a dry room?
Either storage or drying.
Okay. Either to store it or to dry it?
Correct.
Okay. And when you took the samples of air for the trash, it had already been in the dry room.
Yes.
Okay. So, and it would not have had the moisture or the same odor that it had back on July 16th.
I can't answer that.
Your common knowledge, would it tell you, sir?
It's possible.
Let me finish the question. Your common knowledge.
I'm going to object. He's asking him to speculate.
Let him finish asking the question. Sir, do not answer the question until I tell you to answer. Question.
Your common knowledge of being a human being that has trash and has dealt with trash all your life. I'm sure you've thrown it out a few times, right?
Correct.
Wait, don't answer the question, sir, until I instruct you to answer the question.
The odor would be significantly different if you had a wet bag of trash versus trash that was individually taken out and put in a dry room.
Objection to that one. You may answer, sir.
If the trash was wet and they placed it in a dry room to dry, yes, the smell would be different from the time it was wet and then the time when it was dry, if it was wet.
Okay. And when you took the air sample of the garbage on August 29th, the trash was dry.
That's possible.
Can you look at your report and see what the trash was stored in at that time?
The trash was stored in a brown box.
Brown box like one of these? Cardboard box.
Brown cardboard box with tape all the way around it, correct.
And it wasn't moist and wet and damp, was it?
No, it was not.
Now, you testified that and I'm showing the witness Defense Exhibit E. You testified, sir, that you collected this trash can. I'm sorry, this gas can.
Yes, sir, I did.
It's Saturday. I apologize, sir.
May counsel lay a predicate that that's the same photograph as the introduced photograph?
I would be more than happy to do that, sir.
Okay.
This is the same photograph that you took that's been admitted into evidence, is it not, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And when you got this gas can, it's metal.
Yes, sir.
And it appears to also have some, I guess, some gas dripping on the side a little bit.
It was completely dry.
Can I show it to you and
Sure.
maybe get a closer look?
Yes.
Pointing right below the duct tape that appears to be a shiny area. Does that appear to you in any way to be some either wet or slightly drying gas?
It was not a wet can. That might be a stain from it being there prior and drying, but it was not. There was no gas in that can that I remember.
And you process this entire can for prints,
Correct.
and it didn't have any fingerprints, did it?
No, it did not.
So it's possible somebody wiped this down for fingerprints?
Your Honor, that object is speculation.
Sustain.
Do you know or do you have any indication as to whether this can was wiped down to clear someone's fingerprints before turning it over to him?
Objection. He's asking him to speculate.
Sustain.
There are some indications that you can see, sir, when processing an item for fingerprints as to whether it's been wiped down. Isn't that correct, sir?
On occasions, yes.
Were you able to identify as to whether anybody had attempted to wipe down this particular piece of evidence before turning it over to you?
It did not appear to me to be wiped down,
But it certainly did not contain anyone's fingerprints.
and that's possible. That's correct.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
Very few questions. The gas can that you just testified about was handed to you by someone, correct?
It was actually pointed out, and I retrieved it.
Okay. Did you collect it yourself using gloves?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And when you took possession of it, do you carry it by its handle?
That's the way you normally carry the gas can.
The vehicle in question, the Sunfire, where was it stored between July 16th and the end of August when you took those samples that you testified about?
It was secured at our office in our garage.
Same location the entire time?
Yes, ma'am.
Was the odor in the vehicle the same between July 15th and when you took those samples at the end of August?
Yes, ma'am, there still was a strong odor on the vehicle.
Okay. Had it diminished in any way, to your recollection?
Not that I recall.
The items that we're referring to as trash, those items were handled by Gerardo Bloisy,
Yes, ma'am, they were.
photographed by him, not you?
Correct.
Do you have knowledge as to whether or not the garbage was stored separately from the car the entire time?
Yes, it was.
That's all I wanted to follow up with. Thank you, Your Honor.
Any additional questions on the area that was just covered? Okay, may the witness be excused. Thank you. You may be excused, sir, subject to recall.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the time is now approximately 8 minutes to the hour of 1. I don't necessarily think we have an 8-minute witness. Okay, we're going to recess for today and reconvene in this matter on Monday at 9 a.m. I have worked out the kinks as far as restaurant number 1. It'll be one day, hopefully next week in the evening. And as soon as I get some additional information, I will see if I'm able to work out the kinks on restaurant number 2. Okay? Oh, okay. I think things should work out for the hamburgers, though. Did they? You don't know yet? Okay. I'll seek it. I find out before I leave today. Okay. See you on Monday morning.